everybody, and welcome back to the Little Woman podcast. Jimena and I continue our discussion on May Alcott Nieriker, who was Louisa May Alcott's younger sister, a very talented painter and a very interesting woman who has definitely been overshadowed by her sister. I would like to read you an excellent essay that Jimena has written. It is called "Could Laurie be considered a fallen soldier?" And if you want to read more of Jimena's writings, you can follow her on her blog in Tumblr called Theater Art Blog. Could Laurie be considered a fallen soldier? Quote, "I just realized something. In Mexico we have this expression of the fallen soldier. It probably exists in other countries. It applies for men who perform big gestures. For example, big posters, fireworks, flash mobs for a girl they like. And they make it public, like it's a big deal. They would invite the entire family to the proposal, or put a big poster in the middle of the school for everyone to see and cheer. And they expect the girl to accept them, just for that. The thing is that it is not as romantic as people think. They are appealing to social pressure, to force the girl to say yes. It's not nice, it's embarrassing, and a lot of girls hate it. I personally witnessed one of those things, and the girl was warned about it, so she didn't attend school that day. But everyone was attacking her. They said she was heartless and that he was an awesome guy. What were these people talking about? It was humiliating. Laurie didn't arrive with a huge bouquet or took a microphone to declare his love for Joe, but he thought that his grand gesture was going to college and graduating well. And just for that, Joe had to say yes. Thank God Amy made him understand that college was nothing more than his duty, and as Mr. Knightley wisely said, duty is the only thing a man ought to do, but it happened after the proposal, so Joe had to bear him. The thing with the fallen soldiers is that more often than not, the girl had already rejected them, but they keep insisting. In Little Woman, Joe knew of Laurie's feelings and she was super uncomfortable about it. My God, she put an actual pillow to avoid him getting too close. She had talked with Marmee about it and both agreed that it was not a good idea. This was not a surprise. Joe had known for quite a while that they wouldn't work, and Laurie knew she would say no. And she appealed to Laurie's good reasoning to understand that and leave her alone. She was wrong. Quote, "She wouldn't be vain enough to think people were going to propose when she had given them every reason to know what her answer would be." Everybody feels for Laurie in that scene, and I get it. It is breaking his heart and it's shattering whatever future he thought they could have. But I felt worse for Joe, because Laurie is pushing her too much, and it's unfair and inconsiderate. He argues that he had given up things to please her, which is so unhealthy. Then he says their family expects it, which is sort of a social pressure, but really Marmee doesn't like it. He proceeds to insult Bear, and here is where I feel for him the most, cause Joe says that Fritz is her best friend after him. That must sting, but I guess it's the natural course of life. Your partner does become your closest person. He goes as far as to threat her with hurting himself. Please, Joe and Laurie fans, do tell me, where do you see the romantic, healthy elements in this proposal? All I see a woman having to deal with a man-child. Look, I feel bad for Laurie, I really do, and I love him. Together with Amy and Joe, he has the biggest character growth. He goes from this guy to a very respectable, hard-working man, and even before, he did really wonderful things for the girls, but at that moment he was not the nice boy next door. And then Laurie expected all women to treat him nicely, just because Joe broke his heart. There is no fallen soldier, just an unrequired, imprudent ridicule." End quote. And hashtag Laurie needed tough love. I come from a rather prude Scandinavian country. I don't have experiences with fallen soldiers, but definitely I've had guys privately trying to press me to things that I am not very comfortable with. I think I have mentioned this in some of the earlier episodes. When you read Little Woman, there isn't any scene where Laurie is thinking about future with Joe. It all just comes out in this proposal that our family expects it, grandfather expects it, etc. And I have wondered why that is. After Joe has rejected him and Laurie is in Europe, in Vienna, composing an opera, there's this part where you get this feeling he doesn't really care who he's going to marry. He just wants to be married because that is what is expected of him. And he wants to find love. But I also think that shows very well how he didn't have any kind of plan for the future with Joe. He just expected Joe to be his caretaker. And he actually says that in the proposal itself, that he loves Joe because Joe is always so good to him. He doesn't love Joe because of Joe's personality, and Joe wanted to be a writer, Joe's ambitions, and it's so different to Fredrik because he loves Joe because of all of those things. And he actually thinks about future with Joe, what future would be like. This time in Vienna, when Laurie gives up writing this opera for Joe and starts to think about Amy, it is amazing because you can actually see how he grows out of his delusions. The narrator mentions how he wanted to find an earnest work. He wanted to do something honest. So this transition when Laurie moves on from Joe to Amy, it's actually a metaphor of him growing from a boy into a man. And that is not in any adaptation. This reminded me of something that Melodie and I discussed in an earlier episode, and Melodie said that perhaps Laurie had been reading some kind of overly romantic poetry or a book that was popular at the time with these sort of fallen soldier type of men, encouraging him to keep pursuing this girl no matter how many times she's going to say no, which is not healthy. So in this episode, Jimena and I will be discussing some of the next generation characters. And I don't want you to be confused, especially if you haven't read the sequels of Little Woman. So here are the next generation characters. Beth is Amy's and Laurie's daughter, and John's and Meg's children are Daisy, Demi, and Josie. And Joe and Fredrik has 2 sons, Rob and Ted. And then Fredrik's nephews are Franz and Emil. And Joe kinda adopts them to herself because Joe loves boys. This is Small Umbrella in the Rain, Little Woman podcast, Life and Art of May Alcott, Part 2. Enjoy! Have you seen the 2017 series?
Yes. It's really hard for me to watch that one because I didn't like how Maya Hawke portrayed Joe. I just don't like that they make Joe this very arrogant and very mean person in the adaptations, and we're supposed to love her for that. I didn't like a lot how Joe was portrayed, but yeah, I think.
I felt that it was pushing Joe and Amy once again to fight over Laurie, because I'm so tired with that trope. I like that it showed this relationship that Joe had with Aunt Marge in a more positive light. Yeah, that was something that always bothers me. I kind of have the opposite problem with the 2019 film because I think you said that it makes Joe to look like a martyr. I feel the same with the 1994 film in that scene where Amy gets to go to Europe and then Joe is like, no, I should go to Europe. You don't really see that it was all Joe's fault. You either make Amy some kind of anti-hero or a villain, and then you make Joe a martyr. And I just wonder, is there any way that you can show these 2 characters in a balance?
The 2019 movie apparently praised for that, and I was like, well, no, they didn't even do a very good job at that. Well, if Amy feels like she's second to Joe, then that's a disservice to her. Because, yeah, that's not in the book. Amy never feels like they're different, and they know that. But yeah, the 2017 pushes the rivalry too much. Joe is even angry at Laurie when he comes back married. Yeah, I didn't like that. In the book, if Beth wouldn't have been sick, she would have tried to move the thing to make Amy and Laurie get together. She says it, like, she was like, well, make Mary John, and then Beth, you don't really like him, so it's all to Amy. She would have supported her completely. The 2019 movie apparently praised for that, and I was like, well, no, they didn't even do a very good job at that. Well, if Amy feels like she's second to Joe, then that's a disservice to her. Because, yeah, that's not in the book. Amy never feels like they're different. And they know that. But yeah, the 2017 pushes the rivalry too much. Joe is even angry at Laurie when he comes back married. Yeah, I didn't like that. In the book, if Beth wouldn't have been sick, she would have tried to, like, move the thing to make Amy and Laurie get together. She says it, like, she was like, well, make Mary John, and then Beth, you don't really like him, so it's all to Amy. She would have supported her completely.
First she plans to marry Laurie to Meg, then to Beth, then to Amy.
Yeah.
Because she wants Laurie to be her brother.
Yeah, that's all that she wants.
But people just don't want to believe that because they romanticize their relationship. I think I read this from one of your posts, that when you read the book, you were expecting to see these romantic moments between Joe and Laurie, and there wasn't any. Yeah. I was like, well, that was my reading experience.
Everybody says that the 2019 movie makes them understand that Amy and Laurie belong together, and that's great. So it was like, okay, I'm going to read this book to see if there's something there. The first part, I didn't have any of those to see. And then in the second part, one of the first things that you read is that people have noticed that Laurie's feelings have changed, and that Joe is like, please don't talk about that. Like, don't tease me about that. She really wants to stay away from that, and it annoys her. So I was like, well, how are we supposed to shift that? But, recently a friend has told me that Fred really loved Amy, and then a friend said, well, his working is very similar, his attitude towards it is very similar to how Laurie approached Joe, and that changed completely how I saw it, because if you read the chapter A Foreign Friend, yeah, a lot of what Fred does is very
extravagant.
Like he offers her a serenade, and then the next day she's like, oh look, the girls threw flowers at them. She's like, oh look, I kept this flower that you throw, and Amy is like, oh that one was thrown by Flo, and she immediately throws it away in a very childish way, and I was like, I see it now, and so I kind of now get why some people think that romantic what Laurie is doing for Joe. It's very similar to what Fred is doing, and both of them, I don't think they are depicting actual love. They are maybe infatuation. They are, like I said, they are very privileged boys who are not, well, who gets fancy for girls, and they don't know how to handle a no. I think I sometimes get why Joe and Laurie are chic, but yeah, it's still a bad interpretation of their relationship.
If you think about the way a lot of romantic comedies are played, you get that kind of overly romantic male character making these big gestures, and then you see a lot of that in many films and TV shows. How realistic is that in terms of relationships being successful? Yeah. Joe, in the very beginning of the novel, she kind of makes these pretty clear statements what she finds romantic and unromantic. It is weird to me how people say that Joe kind of rejected marriage, but it's also because I've done lots of research on Louisa's views on love and romance. But in the first part, Joe is reading a romance novel, and then I noticed that in the chapter Castles in the Sky, a few chapters earlier, Joe has had this meltdown because she sees that Margaret is now a woman and John is marry her. She's not really that angry that she wants to marry. She's afraid that Meg is leaving and going away, and she's actually moving to the next door. She's not going too far. But then in Castles in the Sky, there's this scene where Joe says to Meg that she's going to get married and have beautiful children, And then she's quite happy and content when she says that. It's interesting because she's reading a romance novel. In the book itself, she doesn't really have anything against marriage per se.
No, and she, in the proposal scene, Jo says that she's not ready to get married and to give up her liberty. And then Laurie says, I think you would, and you would find someone, and you will love him, and die for him and everything. And she doesn't say no. She says, actually, well, I will. I don't remember the quote exactly, but she basically says, if I found the right one, yes, I will. So that's something that actually reminds me of Louisa May Alcott. But yes, she's not rejecting Laurie because she rejects marriage. She's rejecting Laurie because she doesn't believe they can work it out as a marriage. I think to Jo Laurie Shippers, it's better to believe that Jo never wanted to marry than to believe that she doesn't want to marry Laurie. And that's why they make that excuse.
A lot of people are very selective readers. It's very unfortunate because I think then you lose all the context. This is a massive problem because I think the entire Jo and Laurie shipping idea, I think it's entirely constructed by the movies. You can see some of that in the book if you're a fan of big gestures that Laurie does. In the novel, you don't get any kind of glimpses to Laurie's head of him dreaming about a future with Jo, starting a family with her, or anything. It is entirely manufactured by the films, and they don't show things like Jo wants to go to the university. When Laurie is in the university, he doesn't really pay attention to his studies. So I once read this quote from someone who said that in the 1994 film, when Christian Bale is packing school books, it means that he loves university. So he and Jo are a good match because they both like the word of academics, and I'm just rolling my eyes.
Yeah, no, I think in that scene, the 1994, Jo even is telling, like, take this and take this book and take this one.
Yeah.
And Laurie is like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to do it. Well, how is that making an academic? I don't know.
It's so funny when Jo is in New York. When she sees Friedrich, they're not introduced right away. She's adjusting the position of her couch so that she can spy on him through the glass door and hear what happens in his classroom. That's pretty transparent of Jo having a crush to this German teacher.
I just read that from your post. I think yesterday you posted, and I was like, oh, yeah. That is it. Yeah, that definitely shows that you don't go looking and see what you can get a peek on someone that you don't like.
In the 2018 film, I don't think there was anything romantic going on with Jo and Laurie, and I liked that. She was very clear when she said no to him, but then there is a scene where she says that, oh, Amy stole Laurie from me. This is what I mean when I say that the whole Jo and Laurie thing is entirely manufactured.
At this point, with so many adaptations, I don't feel like filmmakers are reading the book anymore. There is just a canon of scenes, and there is a way of telling the story in the movies. They directly go to that, and they don't pay attention to the book. They say in the 2019 that Greta was like reading the book, and that she was underlining everything important, and it's like, if she did that, it's like you said, it's selective reading, because she put the proposal scene and she cut the part where she says, that line where she says, well, yeah, I would marry if the right one comes. But yeah, she did a lot of that thing too. You said it also in on one of your posts that, she was trying to please the LGBT community by making her maybe asexual, from the LGBT community. So she wanted to please everyone with that ambiguous ending where, well, if you want her to be married to a priest, then you have it. If you don't, you also have that. Yeah, I don't think that she actually read the book with the attention that it needed, and I don't think other filmmakers have done the same.
It is really disturbing when you say that you want to do a good job with Amy and Laurie, and then you are trying to please these people who are rooting Jo and Laurie, and then you make statements that you actually want Jo and Laurie to be together, while simultaneously saying that Amy and Laurie should be together.
When I read the book, I realized the letter scene where Jo writes to him saying that she's changed her mind. And in the book, that obviously didn't happen, because actually Jo rejects Laurie twice. he writes again, and she said, like, no, I told you no, I said no, and she even says, like he should find a girl for him and just keep a place in his heart for his friend Joe. And yeah, the 2019 movie makes this choice of having Joe regretting her decision and going and writing this letter, so that Joe and Laurie Shepard would be like, see, she did change her mind, and it's like, well, okay, that's not true, that's not how it happened. She never ever said that. It's pushing him to other women.
When you read Louisa May Alcott biographies, you come across how she hated fan mail, and then she got all these letters from these little girls saying, you should marry Joe to Laurie, you should marry Joe to Laurie. Or rewrite the entire book, and she didn't want to do that. But then I have also been thinking, well, there must have been Amy and Laurie fans back then, and also Joe and Fritz fans. I also know that Louisa asked a lot of the fan mail to be burned. In the 19th century, when we think about what was acceptable for a male character, that's not really the way things are now. If Little Women would be published today, I think there would be maybe less biased views to the way Laurie is treating Joe, or the way Fred is treating Amy, like you said.
People are still reading that book and they're still thinking that the choices were wrong. So I don't know. I think I feel a lot with the way they are Laurie's highlighted in the adaptations that it biased people's reading. But when I wrote the post of Laurie being a fallen soldier, I got a good responses. So I hope people are realizing how wrong that was.
It is a very slow movement. When you think about Goethe, how his characters were romanticized in the 19th century, I think it's good that there is a lot more discussion now how male characters are portrayed in the media, and also the female characters are. But it's fascinating how our views on the novel can change very drastically depending on the adaptation. Like, I was speaking with somebody who said that they didn't like the 2017 adaptation because they thought that Laurie was quite obnoxious the way he was trying to kiss Joe, harass her. And when I saw the 2017 adaptation, I was so annoyed because they kissed, because that doesn't happen in the novel at all.
You're going to be influenced by the first adaptation that you see. I'm going to tell you, you said something about Amy Laurie fans in the 1860s. May actually was very used to, as soon as some people realized that she was the sister of Louisa May Alcott, they would go to ask her about that, and she would always have to answer, did she marry Laurie? And she was like, no, I didn't. At some point she was kind of annoyed. Like, Louisa wasn't like Joe was in Joe's voice. Yeah, there were people who liked the relationship.
Do you mean there were people who liked Amy's and Laurie's relationship?
Yeah, there were girls that were like, did you marry him? And she was like, no. Well, yeah, she was like, no,
that makes me very happy.
Yeah, in the biography, in the memorial that was written in the 1920s, the author was able to interview a girl that met May, and yeah, she was like, I was talking about her, like, Little Women and whether she married Laurie and, all of this.
I thought it was interesting when you said that May sometimes felt herself lonely because she felt that it was difficult for her to find a partner who could accept her as a sort of a career girl. I think this is the same with all the Alcott sisters, because I think you and I talked earlier that Anna Alcott, she was quite old when she married. During this time, the average age for a woman to marry was like 17. Anna, I think she was like 31 or something, which was a quite late age to get married. She took her time to marry for love. I think with Louisa, Mel Henry was her soulmate, so when he passed away, I think she was trying to find love also after that. Must have been a bit difficult when you have this sort of ideal person that you compare every man you meet. I mean, yeah. You can read from Louisa's journals how she was sad and lonely. Compared her own situation to her sisters, and nobody can really convince me that she wanted Joe to be a spinster. I thought it was interesting how all of them believed this idea that women should only marry if when they know it's a real deal. Could you tell a little bit about May and Ernest?
That was really, really nice. I made a post that said that Louisa's writing was kind of prophetic because, like I said, Ernest was a distant man who was a violinist. He chose business, to make a better living and to help his family. He had 8 brothers. So yeah, he ended up in business. He was always very interested in the arts, and so when he learned that May was a painter, he was very enthusiastic about that. And then when it was clear that they felt something for each other, but he had to choose between moving to Russia or moving to Paris for his job, and he goes to May and he asks her to marry him, and they get married so that they don't get separated, and they move to Paris. Well, they moved to Paris and then they moved to a Mulhouse that is in Paris. May would always praise him for how supportive he was. There's a part in a letter that she says that he's so enthusiastic that he's more interested in seeing what May has painted to give her a critique than in having a good meal. So that's I'm sure that for May that was everything, because when Louisa learned about her engagement, she was very concerned about it. She wasn't against it, but she had just read a novel that is the story of Alice, that Alice is a painter, and she's very focused on her artistic education, and she says she's never gonna get married. And then she gets married. She tries to balance work and life and personal life, and she ends up giving up her art. And Louisa didn't want that to happen to her sister. Ernest was never going to be like that, and that he really supported her. May called that the 2 happiest years of her life. Yeah, she was one of a kind. And I said in a post recently, May got her Laurie at the end. On the contrary, he encouraged Amy to keep painting, and she didn't want her to stop her art. And so, May also got a man.
It's really beautiful.
It's a wonderful story. It's so sad that May had died so young, but she made sure to live life at its fullest. And when she found the right one, she didn't hesitate it. Within months, really, they got married. Yeah, she was a person who really made sure that she lived life at its fullest.
I think there was some quote from May, something about living life in the fullest. It's really interesting, well, a bit sad how, a lot of people sort of make fun of May. They see her only as this sort of domestic goddess, but then what I read about Anna Alcott, she seems genuinely really nice person.
I don't know if the person deleted or what, but it says, Meg is useless. What? Because apparently she said that, the girl would still be friends with Laurie, even if Meg wouldn't have hurt her uncle. And her story is as worthy as any other of the other sisters.
It's a bit same as with Laurie in the adaptations. They don't really pay that much attention to Meg's growth. Essentially, her arc is that she's trying to be a super mother. I think it's also about the Vanity Fair scene when she's being objectified by the other girls. She kind of sees the contradiction there. These people are not my friends. They are just treating me as some kind of a doll. I think they even refer her as a doll in the novel. So it's about Meg sort of coming to terms with who she is in the first book. Then in the second part, it's about her trying to find a balance between marital duties, still be authentic to herself. There's that scene when she's not wanting John to be as involved with raising the children, and then it creates all kind of problems, and then Mommy steps in and says that it would be good for Demi to spend more time with his father. It's really modern take on parenting that Louis has in the novels.
Yeah, I really like that. Mommy is encouraging the girls to get married because she says at one point that the greatest thing in life is to find a man that loves her and that's good. And like you said, she's encouraging Meg to let John be part of parenting, especially with Demi. And that's a part that I really like, that it shows that John, she's a really sweet man, but she also has her temper when it comes to discipline. And Meg doesn't have the heart to tell Demi, like, to shout at him or to be a good mother. She needs discipline. Yeah, she wants to be perfect. She wants to be the perfect wife, mother, woman. I mean, she has a meltdown because of the jelly, and she's in the kitchen and she's crying, and John is like, what's wrong? like just a jelly. And she even laughed at that. Like, really? That's it? And it's like, well, she's been working herself out, so of course a tiny thing like that is going to snap.
The male characters in Little Woman, they turn out to be very good father figures. The way Laurie is Beth and Friedrich with his sons.
I think I read it on the blog that was to celebrate the 150 years of the book, where it says that the girls, because of the way things are, they have to take their names. So they are May Brooke, they are Joe Bear, and Amy Lawrence. But really, it's the men who are that are adopted in this family, and they belong to and they form this community. All the men are lacking parents. Like Frederick's mother died, and from what he says, I think that his father abandoned him. And then obviously Laurie lost his parents, and John, I think his mother is still alive back then, or not? I don't remember.
Yeah, his mother might be alive.
Yeah, there's some mention of how much he took care of her.
Yeah.
When he died. Yeah, when he was doing his funeral. These men have had a lot of problems on their lives, and so there are two ways they can go. They can be as bad parents, or they can be absent, and they can make their children have absent fathers like they have, or they can be the best fathers they can be, and they choose this last one. So it's really nice how the men do everything to be the best parent. Very close friends with John Pratt, and so he would write to him a lot, but he was also very good friends with Joe, that he talked about how they made that they display, and they call each other dolphins, and I don't remember what was those nicknames. They use boys, they do a play, and they also call each other by the names of the characters that in the play, and I was like, well, Louisa and Alf did the same, and I was like, oh, that's really nice touch in your voice. Yeah, and he was also very good friends with May, and there are a few letters from May talking about, she would talk to him about the parties that she went and the events and everything, and I think there's a letter where she teaches him about girls.
Oh.
Something like that, and it's like, yeah. It reminded me to the chapter where Lord comes in and he treats all the sisters differently, and then comes to Amy, he's like, oh, you're so beautiful, and then Amy is like, oh, he's random. and they tease each other, and they flirt each other. In the article that I read, it says even that, well, May was Al's favorite, I suppose, because of their fun relationship and how it was. So they didn't talk about their problems, they didn't talk about their issues, they were just talking about the good parts of their lives. And she moved somewhere else, and yet they kept being friends, and I didn't find anything that showed how he reacted to her death or to Louisa's death. But I know that even after when Louisa died, Anna wrote to him that she was going to Europe to leave Lulu back, Faye's daughter. She was going to give her back to the Nieriker family. I think that's the last letter that there is between them. But yeah, they had, for the little time they met in person, they really had a very strong friendship. It's really remarkable how close they were.
I'm still between reading the article you sent me, but after that it's really difficult for me to even imagine anything romantic between Joe and Laurie, because it is so little brother and big sister the way Louisa thought about him. I think he mentions that Louisa did not say in public that Alf was Laurie's model, but he had told him that privately in a letter. I think both Laurie and Friedrich, they have these real-life inspirations, and they are inspired by these books that Louisa used to read, but also, I think from Louisa's point of view, sort of what kind of role different men played in her life are sort of represented in Little Woman.
Yeah, that article is that, also, I'm kind of lost also in that we have also you have to work, like stop with that, go to work, go do something. And she does at the end, she gets married and she has a nice family and work and everything. But that was also like, that reminds me to Laurie.
There is this character, what I call as the Laurie archetype in Louisa's novels, that is always influenced for bad or good by women. So I've seen someone like that, but in this case it is a positive influence that the sisters had in his life, because he was very lonely and isolated when he moved to Concord.
Yeah, and I think, people are like, oh, what's wrong with Laurie, like, going around and everything, and it's like, well, back then, it was even more, life was even harder, and Joe likes man, and part of that, I think it's because they get the work done, and Laurie, the way she gets a pass because she's rich, like, she can get other people to do the things that need to be done, but if she were poor, she would be lost. I mean, she wouldn't have anything to any purpose, but she wouldn't have a good life.
Just yesterday, I was reading an article about Henry Thoreau's ideas about work ethics. It does makes me think how in Little Woman, Jo, one of her requests for romantic partner is that they have a very high work moral. Laura Dessel Walls, she kind of mentions that, the German immigrants, they were embraced in the New England area because they had a Lutheran high work moral. It's interesting how in a woman, these certain male characters like Laurie, they get their redemption arc when they find their purpose in life. Was it them being a parent or falling in love with the right person, finding some enjoyment, value in the work that they do?
Like you said, Laurie gets a fan because she becomes altruistic, and also all of these characters, no matter how much money they have, they dedicate their lives to help. And Jo dedicates her life to bring his voice. What more? Well, to help raise his voice. Yeah, you're right. And it's like, it's like she even wants to be flirting with them. Laurie is actually a kid, and I do ask her to flirt, but she's like, well, Amy is really good at that, so maybe you can take some classes from her.
Yeah, he's like a low-key trying to encourage Jo to be a bit more flirty with him.
Yeah, and Jo is like, no, I don't want that. As for example, Amy is like, she like, in Amy's case, Laurie also brings his friends, and Jo wants to be one of the group, and Amy is like enjoying all the attention she gets.
I have read lots of different studies about this. Did Louisa somehow condense May for her feminine assets? Or I think some of that might be true, because when Louisa was younger, she kind of compared herself to May because May was, blonde and with blue eyes. But then it also seems that Louisa grew out of that.
I said there's this idea that Louisa might have deprived Amy of genius because she was jealous and because she was tired that May got everything very easily, which is not really a lie. I mean, May had a lot of love. I mean, there were always people ready to help her because she was so agreeable. They were like, oh yeah, here's some money for you to pay yourself some art classes. Or, for example, Emerson was like, he opened the library to her, and I think also maybe Louisa also had a chance to use that, but May was able to read about art and to watch these paintings because Emerson let her be his library. She had a lot of luck, but to be honest, Louisa also pampered her a lot. Like she would write about, oh, I have money, I'm gonna buy some nice things because she loves beautiful things, and she has a really hard time being poor. I really, really think that by the time Louisa gets the bright Joe voice. She really grew out of that, and she really said, well, my sister's trying to be a wife and an artist, and so that's maybe why she gave that storyline with Amy and her prodigies, and in Joe's voice, because she realized that May also worked. She was getting a lot of recognition, so she grew out of that bad perception.
In Joe's voice, you can see that Joe has actually developed into feminist, but then, like I said in these earlier books, she kind of rejects other women. It is a bit frustrating when you can't really see that so much in the pop culture, because I think there is a pop culture idea of Joe, what Joe is, based on the films, and then there is this pop culture idea what Amy is. It's not very close to the reality of things, or Louisa and May's relationship.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't like too much about the two novels that they did about May, because they were always making her fight with Louisa. And it's like, well, they couldn't have fought that much. And they had to live together in Boston. And they went on a trip together to Europe.
May named her daughter after Louisa.
Yeah, she thanked Louisa. She's like, your mommy gave us much more than any other kind of gift or any other kind of affection, because to her, if it weren't for Louisa, she wouldn't have had a career in Europe. She really owns her a lot. She paid for all of her education and her stay in Europe. So they definitely love each other, and they have the differences. Like Joe says in calls, she said, well, you belong to the old set and I belong to the new. And that's when I say that, well, they are basically saying, I agree to disagree with you. They don't fight anymore. It's a shame that people are always trying to make them fight, because we should have a story where these two women who are very different can also be very good friends.
At the calls, it's really the last time when they have a conflict. Like after that, it is a pretty smooth relationship that they have.
She's very angry. I think more at herself than at Amy when she loves the tree. And so Amy said something about what she plans to do, that she plans to see if she continues or not in Europe, and that it's not just a mere trip to her. And Joe is like, well, suppose that you don't have genius, where are you going to do this? And she's angry. And she's like, and Amy is like, well, I'm going to come back to teach. And Joe says, no, you're going to marry a rich man and live with a life of luxury the rest of your life. And, she said that, but I think she said that in the moment she's angry, she wishes it were her, the one who has to go to Europe. And we all say hurtful things when we are angry and we blame others for things that are our responsibility. So I think that's the last time that you really see that they have a confrontation, but it's not even that. Like I said, she's more angry with herself than with her.
I think with Joe, a lot of people really often dismiss that, but she's quite possibly the most maternal character from all the sisters, because she's always wants to mother someone, usually young boys. You see in the films how Joe spends a lot of time with Laurie, but then when you read the book, every time when she's outside and she's like a young boy, she goes to hang out with the boy. I was discussing with Alcott scholar Laura Walls, who had made this research on the German immigration in Little Women, and she said that she loved the way the Marches, they adopt Friedrich to their family, and they actually start to embrace his German heritage, which is very unusual of the time. But then also, when it comes to Friedrich, it's mentioned how he has these two nephews who he's taking care of. I read from some blog once again that why would Joe adopt these random children? I'm like, did you read the book? She loves the fact that he has two boys, because Joe loves boys. I think with
Joe accepts these boys and considers him and as part of her family as much as Rob and Haley are. And then what I also like is that both Franz and Amy, they're not just adopted by Joe. I mean, the whole family considers them as part of their community. They call Amy Aunt Amy. That means that all the family really love them, really treats them and gives them the place that they deserve. As they're not just, these kids, these stray kids. They have to be here because Joe married Fritz. No, they are part of the family. I really think we need a Joe's Voice adaptation because all the books make statements about feminism, about these ideas, but really Joe's Voice is where you can see a lot of very much clearer ideas of feminism, like the quote that you sent me yesterday about Josie. They're like, Grandpa, do you think the women should obey men just because they, I don't know if she said because they are stronger or something like that? And there's also this chapter where they send, the sisters hang out together to do their mending. And then Meg was like, well, you know what, the girls from the university, they also should learn to do this. And, they are not just mending, they are changing ideas. And Amy brings this woman, this wealthy woman, to talk to them about, more and more ideas. So I love that chapter because it's how you can combine femininity. It's not against independence and feminism.
Always really like that because Daisy and Demi, and then also Beth, they call Friedrich as Uncle Fritz. So it goes both ways. In Joe's Boys, they also mentioned that they are going to have a women's rally and make posters. They are voting for their right to vote. It's nice to see that kind of historical connections because, Louisa was the first woman in Concord who voted. I think people really tend to neglect how Louisa also makes a point of writing very feminist male characters. My favorite example is Mac in Rose in Bloom, but I think, Friedrich and, John and Laurie with Amy is also more decent. I did the evaluations on the portrayals of the male characters in Alcott studies in the 70s. A lot of the people, they were complaining about the male characters, and these scenes that they were referring, they happened in the adaptations but not in the book. But you can kind of see that still today because, people say that, Friedrich was against Joe writing, sensational stories. And, in the book, Joe herself doesn't want to write the sensational stories. You completely lose the context of how Louisa May Alcott kind of embodies intersectional feminism.
Yeah, that was something that, again, when I have seen the movie and then I got confused because I was like, hold on, so I read it a few times because I was like, am I understanding right? Is Joe having mental distress because of these stories? So then it's not very good that she keeps writing them, right? Frederick never actually says, your stories are bad. She says, the genre is horrible. And she's right. And I think today people might say, oh, that's too much. I mean, what's wrong with, reading these stories? She's being too moralistic and everything. But, that's the way the Marches thought, and it may sound a little too much to our time, but back then it was really important. This stuff. Yeah, I think it's the same as when it happens. Like, they make so much emphasis in God and Christianity and everything. That it's like trying to understand the historical context of the story. I don't think people understand that fully. That how important was religion, how important was morality back then.
Louisa was a very religious person herself. It's quite natural that she would include some of that into a book that is semi-biographical novel about her. She also wrote sensational stories, and she also did not like her editor, because when you read some of these more racist stories from Louisa, they are not immoral. But, her publisher was asking her to cut out the scenes that he thought were too preachy. It's actually the magazine that is the villain in the novel, the Weekly Volcano. If you want to find a villain from the story, it's never Friedrich, because in the book he actually gives Jo a copy of Shakespeare and encourages her to study character. It doesn't sound like someone who wants Jo to stop writing. He's someone who wants Jo to become a better writer, so she can put her focus on writing something that is meaningful for herself.
I wrote a few months ago about how, Jo even says that, she says, if I didn't have a conscience, I could keep writing it. So, she definitely knows it's wrong. She's so ashamed that, and it's something that I think that in the movie she even says that she doesn't like the signing with her name because she doesn't want her mother to read it. And it's like, well, if you're ashamed of what you're writing, then you shouldn't write that.
Jo and Laurie ship is entirely constructed because part of that is turning either Amy or Fritz into a villain. So it's really sad because you would actually see that Jo herself has this mental breakdown because she has to write these stories. Well, of course you are going to align with Friedrich because he's trying to help her, but then you're not including that breakdown, so you don't really see the lengths that he goes to trying to help her.
Yeah, I think the only adaptation that I see that it's Friedrich criticizing the genre of Jo's writing is the 2017 TV series, but then Jo gets angry, so that's also not...
I like Amy and Laurie in the 70s series, but they make both Laurie and Friedrich temperamental, but then they should actually make Jo more temperamental and Friedrich less temperamental. In the 1933 and the 1949 films, Friedrich's feedback is a lot closer to the book. He's very encouraging and there is no conflict. But then, once again, you do not see that how Jo has that mental breakdown. Since 1933, that mental breakdown, they have never included that. In the book, she has this mental breakdown. I think she even mentions how this research that she's doing for these stories that her publisher is asking, she has night terrors. I think it mentions that it is corrupting her pure soul. And I've often wondered if this was something that happened to Louisa. In Rose in Bloom, there's this scene where Rose says to her uncle that there's this book that she wants to read, but the book has a bad reputation. And then she reads the book and says that, well, uncle, you were right. It was a book that didn't do me any good. And then in Jo's Boys, there is that whole chapter where Demi suddenly decides that he wants to be a journalist. And Jo doesn't want that because maybe bad experiences that Louisa had with writing to magazines. I think it's really fascinating that she did have some kind of idea of what kind of message she wanted to deliver to people with her stories. When Friedrich encourages Jo to become, a better writer, to find her own voice, it also means more liberty for Jo as a writer, or Louisa as a writer, because then you are not so bound to these requests of the editors. And very ironically, when you read Louisa's letters with her editor, Thomas Nice, he never forced Louisa to marry any of her characters. It's more about distribution and all these more mundane topics.
Yeah, you're right. Frederick wanted possible to her to become the best writer that she can be, and at first I also rolled my eyes at some words. The father or face or some of them were like being very wrong, and this is not morally correct. And I was like, okay, and yeah, I also rolled my eyes at that. But then you have to understand that this is a book for girls mainly. You really have to set these values and set these ideas very strongly into their minds, and after that they can make their decisions. But she's trying to tell them how they should behave, and yeah, that may sound a little bit much for us, especially it's necessary.
Especially because during that time, most of the marriages, they were made because of economical reasons. So when women actually married for love, it meant liberty more for the future, which is actually very an interesting concept when you think about it, in the 19th century context.
Yeah, and recently somebody spoke about how next chapter of Vanity Fair is not really well addressed in the 2019 movie, and then I was like, well, they glorify also Amy for wanting to marry rich, and they are like, oh, we should praise her because she's being very pragmatic and she wants to save her family. And I was one of those people who said, well, yeah, I mean, she's being smart and she's sacrificing herself. But when you really think about that, it's a horrible thing to do because, her intention might be noble, but she's condemning herself and Fred to a very loveless marriage, to just a marriage of convenience. It's never going to work. And even more for her, I was telling you how Ernest always encouraged me to paint. And Laurie also, she was like, why are you going to give up painting? She didn't like that. And Fred would be like, yeah, it's okay. You should give up your art. He doesn't say that. She doesn't say that. But it's like in Count Lawrence, Kate Bond says that she likes drawing, but she's going to abandon that once she gets married because her responsibility is wife, as wife is going to overtake everything else. That would happen with Amy too. It's not a good idea. It's sacrificial and it might be a noble cause, but in the end, it's gonna cost her a lot of unhappiness. And also, she's gonna be away from her home. And also, I was thinking the other day, well, if you want Laurie and Joe to get married, or you don't want Joe to get married at all, then that community that is forming Joe's boys, of all the family living together in Plumfield, with the other boys on the girls from university, that wouldn't exist, because Amy would be in Europe, Meg might be around, but Joe, if you want her to stay in New York publishing, she's going to be there alone. There's going to be Plumfield. You really break up the whole family.
I haven't thought of that. It's true. It's a bit the same when Laurie proposes to Joe. He says that Joe doesn't need to write once they marry because he's rich. So he doesn't really get how important the work is for Joe. And that's also because Laurie has never worked. And later on he does. In Joe's Boys, there's the scene where Joe says to Friedrich that he's the best husband in the world because he's so supportive on her career. It's actually really sweet. It must have been very difficult for this woman in the 19th century to find a soulmate who could accept that they also want to work for themselves.
People would have said, oh, if these girls get married, then it means that they're not independent anymore. It's like, no, that's not what happened. May died. Her father called independence her martyr. And I really love that because even though she got married, it never represented an obstacle for her. And I think that's what happens in the book. They never are going to be obstacled by Faith or John or Laurie.
When I have been doing this research on this real life Joes and Friedrichs, it's always some kind of couple who has a similar goal for something bigger. Like Eliza and Charles Follen, they had this goal to open their home for people in need. They shared their views on abolitionism and immigration. Elizabeth Powell and her husband, who, according to my theory, was also a model for the 15-year-old Joe. She became a dean of school, and her husband was a lawyer. And it kind of echoes Joe and Friedrich because they also had 2 sons together. And if I remember right, other one of them became a priest, which is also what happens to Teddy in Joe's Boys. Yeah, I think people lose a lot when they don't pay attention to the historical context. I think it makes it makes the book a much more richer reading experience and very fascinating.
Now that you said that, the common purpose, in Amy and Laurie's case, that common purpose becomes helping people who have artistic ambitions, and they could have gone the other way. They could have grown bitter because they didn't have the genius that was required to be a famous artist, and they could have, just enjoyed their wealth, their wealth just for themselves. But they were like, well, if we can be the famous artist that we dream wants to be, then maybe we can help others, And they both say, well, in Europe we met a lot of kids that could have the genius and they don't have the means, so let's help them. And Amy wants to help girls mostly, and you see that happen with Nat and Laurie, and then in your voice you learn that Amy has a bunch of prodigies. I really wish Louisa could have written more about that, but I understand that May died, and so she couldn't write any more of that. But that's a common purpose for them. And what you were saying about, rich people have a hard time. In her book, and how you've also said this in other podcasts, how Laurie, for example, gets bad because she has this altruistic objective that she shares with Amy, and so it's not like rich people, it's wrong to be rich, that you can be rich, but you have to be bad to society.
Yeah. One of the ideas in Transcendentalism was that the wealth is only meaningful when there is a purpose for it. In order to receive, you must give. May was the same way. They were taught to be very empathic.
Yeah, there's a letter where she writes to Al that she's like, oh, you remember how I used to be so materialistic and so selfish, and I'm so ashamed of that. She's like, I'm a girl from the working class, and I should be proud of that, and I'm going to work and do everything I can to help others, and she did. I mean, I talk about her writing, her travel guide. She opened the first art center in Concord. It was a big deal. In Italy, she talked about how she met a friend, and this friend talked to her about there were free art schools in certain cities in Italy, and they loved that idea. She was like, yeah, everybody, no matter how poor they are, they should have this access to art, because she wanted everyone to be able to appreciate the beauty in these works. And it was 1875 where this art center opened. And it was amazing, and the people who were there really were very thankful to her because of it. And she was always trying to help people. I think the most famous one is Daniel Chesterfield, that he did the Lincoln Memorial, Washington. His father would take the train with May every day, and he would talk about how his son wants to be a sculptor, and he's starting to practice and to make progress, and she didn't hesitate. The next day she was like at her home, at his house, and she was like, here, take my sculpting tools. That meant so much to Daniel, because she even in the book that in May's memorial, she wrote the preface for the prelude. She wrote the prelude, and he says how much that meant, and that it was 1920 something, and she still had one of those tools. It's really amazing how much she had on the people at Concord in her short life. Yeah, she was as altruistic as she could be.
That is amazing. We need a movie about May Alcott.
I know. Well, I have an idea. I just saw there's a ballet that talks about the cellist, and so I want that to be a ballet about me. But yeah, also a movie. I would really love someone to tell that story. She was a beautiful person, and her love story is also amazing. And yeah, everything that she did, I think it would help a lot.
Could you tell a little bit about Alf Whitman?
She he arrived at Congress, he was 15 years old. It surprised me a lot how he just stayed there. I think it was like less than a year. And he made such a strong, he was able to form such strong friendship with, the Alcott family. And he was friends with all of them. And he was, like I said, I mean, she's more angry with herself than with her, but she has to, at that time, it's so fresh, the disappointment and the news that she has to blame others.
And, Mommy was right when she said, well, you brought that to yourself.
Yeah, Mommy is like, well, I'm done, but, even she said that Carol writes, and she was like, well, I was thinking of bringing Joe, but, she doesn't like friendship, So Amy would be much more grateful to that. And also, I think something that people forget is the part of the art fair. Aunt March had already told Aunt Carol that she was going to pay for Amy's food, but then the thing that really convinces Aunt Carol that Amy is the right one to go is what she does in the art fair. And that is one of my favorite chapters because about how Christian this book is, and religion is something that helps Amy a lot to find peace and to tone her anger down and to be a better person. And so in that chapter you really see how she has learned, and that this conflict that she had with Manchester really brings out the best of herself. Not only did the family praise her for it, but even it says that Manchester, she felt ashamed of how unkind she was to Amy, and now she wants to be as kind as her, so she's trying to be nice too. That's the moment where she really earns the Europe trip. And even Marmee, I think it says that when Marmee learns about that, she feels like a peacock. She was like, oh, my daughter is like, yeah, that's my daughter. That's a really nice chapter. Laurie, when he buys 2 vases that Amy asked him to buy because they were made by Manchester. And so she's like, oh, she's not selling them. Laurie, go and buy them. And bought them. And he filled them with flowers. And he gives those vases to her. And he wrote to the Magnificent March, And that's really nice. And it's never adapted. But it's really nice. And it really shows how nice Amy is, and how much she's trying to fight against, her selfish nature that she once had.
Yeah, Amy is really genuinely kind person. I read this modern retelling of Little Woman, Subscribing to the Enemy, and it's about Jo and Fritz. But there's this interesting scene where Jo says that the reason for her behavior quite often is that she's actually jealous that her sisters are very pretty. And that really got me thinking that jealousy that Jo sometimes has for Meg and to Amy, because, the book mentions that Jo is closest to Beth, and Beth is sort of an outcaster in the society, same way as Jo sees herself. There are those quotes from Louisa when she was in the top of her fame and the fans couldn't see her. They were always disappointed because they expected her to be pretty. I always thought that was so strange because Jo is not written to be particularly pretty in the novel. Maybe there is some truth in that.
Sort of a contradiction that some Jo fans have. They love her because she's tomboy, because she's not as pretty as Amy and Meg, because she's not the idea of beauty that TV, the media sells us. They love her because of that, because she's a rebel and because she wants more, and that she doesn't adhere to the rules of society. But then they also are like you said, people get disappointed that she's not as pretty as she should, or that she should have married this rich bachelor. And it's really contradictory, these two ideas. I don't know why it happened. I mean, it's frustrating.
There is this contradiction on how these more rebellious characters are being seen in the media, but because people want to see them beautiful. Louisa May Alcott quite possibly had some kind of discomforts with her own looks as well because of her illness.
I think that the quote that you said yesterday when you said that even in Young Boys, the professor still thinks that Jo was the most beautiful woman he has ever met. I remember that in that chapter it says something about Jo, that she has been gaining weight and that her family loved to feed her. And so the fact that Frederick is like, who cares? She's still the most beautiful woman. It's really beautiful. And I think, this issue about tomboys, and we love them, and today in so many movies, so many soap operas here, you have these kind of characters, and then towards the end of the film or towards the end of the soap opera, they get a makeover. They became these really beautiful girls. And you're like, well, you threw that, all the statements that you did about, it doesn't matter how you look and everything, you threw all of that to the trash. I think that's what people expect to happen with Jo. I don't know, in that place. This idea.
Glad you pointed that. I think the narrator also mentions that when Frederick comes to courting, that the family pays attention to Jo's improved looks. In both of these cases, love beautifies a person.
Yeah, it's a really nice idea.
I think what I like about the married Laurie is he's always very proud of Amy. But then I like that because he doesn't have that constant emotional distress that he has throughout the novel. Then it stops when he marries Amy, because he finds a more balanced life with her. But I think it also has to do with that she helps him to find a purpose.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday about the similarities. Malcolm in the Middle, but there's a part where Paul says that he knows he loves her more than she loves him. And that's okay, because they struggle a lot if both of them were at the same level. And I think a friend also pointed out, well, Laurie, for the way she talked about, he kind of loves Amy a little bit more, because he can't stop calling Jo. When he finally returns with her, he's like, even Jo is like, aren't we proud of calling her my wife? He can't stop talking about her like that, and everything that she does is great.
It's a little bit the same when Jo says, my professor, all the time.
They are so proud of their partner.
It's nice because when Laurie is like, my wife, he always had this desire to be with someone. Like, Laurie was never meant to be alone. That's the way I read the book. He was in love with the idea of love at first. It took some self-growth for him to find real love.
Yeah, I think at some point Laurie realized that he was just prolonging his pain. There's always this phrase that, happiness is also a choice, and he was choosing the otherwise. He was choosing to be heartbroken, even though maybe the heartbreak had already healed. He just had this conflict of he's falling out of love with Jo, and he's starting to think of Amy in a more romantic way. And he goes back to Jo because he feels like he's betraying himself. He tries once more to propose, and it's only when she says again no that she's like, okay, fine, I let it go. And he starts to think, he opens his heart again, and he's like, to Amy. And so, I think, Laurie at some point, he realized that he just making himself suffer.
Yeah.
But it's not real pain.
Interesting in the second proposal, because when he writes that, it feels like he's writing it because he feels that it's his duty, but his heart is not in it when he writes it, because he knows that he has these feelings for Amy. It's psychologically very interesting.
Yeah, I think that letter where she rejects him again was the closure that he needed, because he didn't look sad about it. He was like, okay, in that moment he accepted that he put the letters and the ring away, and he takes a day to mourn that old idea, and then he goes and writes to Amy.
I've complained about this forever, but I would like to see the opera chapter adapted. It has never been adapted.
No, it hasn't.
It is such a very important part of his growth.
Yeah, and in 2019 Laurie briefly mentions, I'm writing an opera. And then Amy says it's a waste of time, which is also a really awful line to give to Amy, because she wouldn't say that. And she said that even though in the whole film you'll never see him near a piano, that's the only thing that there is in the I think in the 1978 movie, she does refer to that. She was like, I was writing a number and I was trying to find my theory, and it ended up look like urine. And so that's it. You don't really see him doing it, but we talked about it.
When I think about Laurie, like, it's possible to show his character. I think it's just what you say, the filmmakers don't pay attention. Hopefully somebody does in the future.
I have to say, I'm really afraid that the attention that the 2019 movie got and the idea that created spread that Joe should have never married, that people are not going to be brave enough to challenge that. And so we're going to have to live with that.
I think all the Joe and Fritz fans, Amy and Laurie fans, all the canon fans should combine their forces and make lots of noise about the canon so that people pay more attention.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. It's like there are 9 adaptations. Like, I don't think any other story that has been adapted so many times and made it. It's like 9 adaptations. Like, people really, really need to watch this film every 10 years, and yet none of them been able to address both all the characters in the way they deserve. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Yeah, I know.
I think one of the problems is where I agree is that I think she's a Joe and Laurie shipper. The lady who wrote the 1994 film is both Joe and Laurie shipper and Joe and Fritz shipper. The lady who wrote the 2017 series is a Joe and Laurie shipper. The lady who wrote the 2008 movie did a really good job with Joe and Freddie, but then also doesn't seem to be an Amy and Laurie shipper. I don't know what's going on here. It's something really, really strange. I'm pretty convinced that Louisa planned Joe to marry already when she was 12, because you can trace Little Women romances, the books that she read, but also to her own life, because she had wishes to start a school with Henry Thoreau and have babies with him. It's sad that people read way too much their own biases on Little Women, which usually is somehow rooted into this idea that Joe should have ended up with Laurie, which is something that I don't think Louisa ever intended.
No, because I mean, like we have talked about it, if Laurie is based on a very dear friend like Woodman, and another one who wasn't really, I mean, she had a bit of I think she had a thing with him, but it wasn't that serious. It's not okay that we want that, that Joe and Laurie were together, because then it's like, well, no, they were just friends.
It was great to have you here.
It was really nice. I've never done it before, so thank you for inviting me. It was really fun to come out this book.
Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices. Bye.